or some of these, or certain ones. He's just concerned about the goal of edification. Paul does not mandate a specific place where this takes place. There's no holy place, no sacred structure where this takes place. He does not mandate even a specific day. That's interesting. A specific day. That struck me as I was going through my dissertation work. Yes, there's a couple of times you see a reference to the first day of the week, but it's not really mandated. I'm not saying you're not supposed to stop going now. That's the point. But that mandate is not there either. Whereas with all the Old Testament stuff, everything is mandated. No special garments for people to wear. That was in the Old Testament. The priest had to wear this thing and that thing. It had to be this made out of brass, and that thing has got this design and that color. And none of that is there in the New Testament. And the New Testament does not also specify or mandate presiding officials. It does talk about people who can be presiding officials, but doesn't mandate that certain ones got to be in charge of this and in charge of that, that kind of thing. Rather, what you do see mandated, instead of details, you see goals mandated. Paul mandates edification. Whatever you do, he says, whether it's this, that, or the other thing, make sure everything is done to build up people. Make sure everything is done decently and in order. So it can't just be mayhem. It's got to be orderly. And he also mandates that things be done with love. 1 Corinthians 13 is right there before 1 Corinthians 14. 1 Corinthians 13, the famous chapter on love, the last wedding you went to probably had it read. It's very common. The 1 Corinthians chapter 13 has nothing to do with weddings. It has nothing to do with marital love, although it applies. It's right there in the middle of a lengthy discussion about assemblies. And when Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have not love, I'm nothing. I'm a noisy gong. That entire chapter of chapter 13 is talking about using love in the assembly. Not just when you speak, but also when you listen. Love is patient. When somebody's saying something you don't agree with. Love is not jealous because somebody else can speak better than I can, or they're getting more airtime than I am. Love endures all things, even somebody that tends to rattle on a little too long. That's Paul's edification model. Those are the things that ought to guide what takes place in any given Christian assembly. So I want to repeat that point. Number 2 is make edification the purpose of going to church. I think churches would be dramatically better, Christians would be dramatically better, if every time they went to church, every week, every month, every year, every decade, they knew that they were there to build up others and themselves to be built up by what's going on. I think we'd all end up being built up. I think we'd be mature, much more mature than we are. So third point. This goes back to the music issue, and this is about the only music point I'm going to make this week, but I thought this was worth mentioning. Less concert and more content. I got to thank Bill Mannon. Yes, you're the man.
I wondered, did you change that after I said that to you? Or?
Well, I sort of inserted it into the whole thing, yeah. I'm adapting. He came up to me after that music thing, and he said, I think a lot of Christians just like the concert feeling of when you got the worship band up there and they crank it up and get the speakers going and the light show going, and it's a concert feeling for a lot of people, and they go for the concert. But I think there needs to be less concert. I'm not saying get rid of it. Less concert, more content. Let me define this. Because if singing is to be done to edify, which Paul explicitly states in 1 Corinthians 14, the focus should be more on the message than on the music. The focus should be more on instruction in that song than on the instrumentation. See what I did there? Thank you very much. And I think the focus should be more on building up than on just pumping up. Concerts can be great because you're just really jazzed by the music and the drums or whatever it is that really got you excited. But I think that we all end up a little more deflated when we walk out of the thing. By the time we get to our car in the parking lot, the balloon loses its air. But if you've been built up, if there was some content, if there was some serious instruction, maybe through the song, if there was some real building up that took place in that meeting you had, I think you're not going to fizzle when you get to the car in the parking lot. And you're going to build on that next week and the week after and the week after. What do we do now? Number 4, more speakers, shorter speeches. It's just a suggestion on my part. But I think 1 Corinthians 14 says, when you assemble, again, it's talking specifically about what you do when you get together. Each one has this, that, and the other thing. He's talking about several people having something to contribute to the meeting. If anyone speaks in a tongue, it must be by 2 or at the most 3 who speak in a tongue. But they have to have somebody interpret each time, or else nobody gets the benefit of what that guy just said in some foreign tongue. Have 2 or 3 prophets speak, he says. 2 or 3. Why is there a multiplicity? And then he says, for you can all prophesy one by one. Paul envisions that several people are going to be talking through this thing. I'm not sure how that would go over for us today, but I think we need to get accustomed to this. I really think we need to have more speakers and shorter speeches. Because obviously, if you have, let's say, 5 people speaking, and they're all going to go on for 40 minutes, that's not, the Bear game will be over by the time that last guy is done. That's not going to fly with me. And I think there's also a reality in our modern culture. Modern people can't handle a long speech like they used to in the 1800s. We've been televisionized. We're accustomed to things moving very quickly. We're accustomed to 30-second commercials, and anymore, we're getting 5-second commercials and 10-second commercials on radio and in television. Our attention span is really getting short. And to expect people to tolerate a 1-hour-long sermon, I don't think it's going to fly. Now, I recognize, and I would consider myself guilty of this, there are certain church cultures that kind of expect the preacher dude to go on for 40 minutes. And there are certain preachers who literally pride themselves, I talked for an hour this week, as if that's a point of pride. And that feeling gets going in preacher circles, believe me. I've been there, but contributed to that. But I don't think that's essentially very good at all. I think we need to have multiple speakers and shorter speeches, and I think everybody would thank us. Specifically, here's some suggestions. Try having 3 speakers in each meeting. Not 1, but 3. And then limit each one of them. Just get up, give me 5 or 10 minutes, no more than 10, on this topic. Have it planned in advance, that's fine, I don't care. And then each one reflect perhaps on a specific biblical text. So they're not just rambling on about the Bear game, but they're speaking specifically about a Christian topic where people will be built up and edified by what they're saying. And if everybody knows that that speech is meant to build up people, that should guide the words that they prepare and that they deliver. And then, if you're just going to have 3 this week, do your best to start inserting new speakers each meeting as much as possible. As much as possible. Because I see, I'm coming to you, Bill, let me finish this sentence. I see the New Testament assemblies as being a training ground for future leaders. We talked about that somewhat in session number 4, but it's not going to be a training ground if only one person does all the talking all the time. This is a great point. The thing is, people are never going to advance if you don't give them a shot to begin with. I mean, I had to start somewhere. Everybody has to start somewhere with that, and even if it is just a reading, yes. But I would like to think that aren't we growing people in our churches that have the ability to stand up and say a sentence without reading it from something? I mean, certainly we have more intelligence than that, right? But I think our churches have stifled our growth so badly that this becomes an issue. We need to have churches that are growing people, building abilities and talents, and that they're sharing with one another, and we get to looking forward to that. This mandate of love. Love must enter the picture, show support for those people. I see sometimes with the churches that will have youth Sunday, where the youth get up and they're in charge of everything. And boy, the outpouring of compassion from most people, the operative word being most, but they're really supporting those kids, and they pat them on the back, and you want to encourage that to happen. Those opportunities are not there. But let's not just encourage the 14-year-olds, let's encourage the 40-year-olds too, and the 24-year-olds. There's a lot. It's a great resource of talent and ability and perspective and intelligence and wisdom that lies dormant in every church because it's never tapped, never given the opportunity to get out. Never given the opportunity. So this point here is more speakers, shorter messages. I don't think everybody wins when eventually. It's going to take some getting used to. I get it. But over the long haul, I think we're going to be growing some serious Christians out of that process. So point number 5 of what do we do now? More dialogue, less monologue. Talked about this in session number 5, I believe it was, where preaching is monologue. That's why it's never found in an assembly context. But teaching, encouraging, exhorting, there's some give and take in that process. When Paul says, let 2 or 3 speak and let the others weigh what is said, here's a point here. You got to ask questions. You got to have the opportunity to ask questions, just like you just did. It's essential to being a disciple. The old Socratic model of how people learned, even before the time of Jesus, was by following the leader. The disciples would follow the master, and they would ask him questions all the time. And if you follow Jesus through the gospel, there's dozens of examples of people asking Jesus questions. Even after he says something, then they'll stop and say, well, wait a minute, what about this? And some of the greatest stuff that comes out of Jesus' mouth is in response to a question. Jesus dialogues with people throughout the Gospels. So if that's true, if it was okay to ask Jesus questions, why isn't it okay to ask questions of the sermon? Is somehow the sermon more sacred than Jesus? I'll just toss that out for your. By the way, don't get on your pastor, because he's just doing what he's being told to do and what he thinks that everybody's expecting him to do. But nobody's growing, I think, if only one person does all the talking. Well, there is one person who's growing, and that is the pastor. And he is. I tell you, to go through that process of creating that message, researching, putting it together, and then delivering it, and then living up to it yourself, there's some serious growth that takes place with any pastor when they go through that process. Point number 6, break big groups into small groups. It's kind of like this. If you got a church that's got that many people in it, what you got to do is do this. Break them into small groups. And a lot of churches recognize the magic of this already. You recognize that we got to drill people into small groups. Somehow, with whatever's going on Sunday morning, get them into a Sunday night growth group or whatever you call it at somebody's house. Often, and a lot of churches are doing that, and I think you need to. That's the only place, not the only place, but it's a great place. And the price